Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine giving your HOA an emergency garage code, and then coming home to your garage wide open, with the HOA president inside, taking photos like it's a crime scene. I warned them in writing. I warned them on the phone. So why did they still do it? And what did my cameras catch that changed everything? I lived in my house peacefully for almost 3 years. It's a nice place in a development that was built in the late 90s, nothing fancy but solid construction and a good neighborhood. When I bought it, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. They kept the common areas maintained, dealt with snow removal in the winter, and mostly stayed out of everyone's business. The annual fees were modest, and the rules were basic common sense stuff like no parking on the grass and keeping your yard reasonably maintained. That all changed when the old board retired and a new group took over at the start of my 4th year there. The new board president was one of those people who you can tell has never had any real power in their life, so when they finally get a tiny bit of it, they go absolutely insane with it. Within 6 months of taking over, this person had tripled the number of rules, started sending out violation notices for things that had been perfectly fine for years, and generally made everyone in the neighborhood miserable. I'm a carpenter by trade, and I do a lot of woodworking projects both for work and as a hobby. When I bought my house, one of the main selling points was the 2-car garage. It gave me enough space to park my truck on one side and set up a proper workshop on the other side. My workshop side of the garage has my table saw, miter saw, router table, and drill press along one wall with my hand tools organized on pegboard above a sturdy workbench I'd built myself. I have lumber racks mounted to the ceiling for storage and usually have a few projects going. Recently I'd been working on a bookshelf for my living room and a coffee table for my sister. For the first 3 years, nobody cared about my workshop. My garage door was closed most of the time, and even when it was open, my tools and projects were neatly organized and didn't create any sort of eyesore. I kept my truck parked on the workshop side most of the time, since that's where I kept all my work gear anyway. Then the new board happened. One of their first acts was to send out a letter requiring all homeowners to register their garage door opener codes with the HOA office for a new emergency access database. The stated reason was in case of fire, medical emergency, or natural disaster when first responders might need quick access. Several neighbors had questioned this at the meeting where it was announced, but the board claimed it was becoming standard practice in HOAs and that our insurance rates might go up if we didn't comply. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that was a lie, but at the time it seemed like a reasonable safety measure. Like an idiot, I had complied and given them my code when they asked for it, never imagining they'd use it for routine inspections. The harassment started small. I got a violation notice because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Apparently it was supposed to be matte black, and mine was satin black. Never mind that it was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. Then I got another notice because I had a small crack in my driveway that they claimed needed to be repaired immediately, even though half the driveways in the neighborhood had similar or worse cracks. I fixed both issues because I didn't want the hassle, even though the fines they were threatening seemed excessive for such minor things. Then they started in on the parking situation. I got a notice saying that I wasn't allowed to park my work truck in my driveway overnight because it was a commercial vehicle. The rule book said nothing about commercial vehicles. I checked thoroughly. I went to the next board meeting to challenge this, and the board president told me that they were interpreting the rules to maintain the residential character of the neighborhood. My truck is just a regular pickup with my company name on the door. Nothing huge or unsightly, but they weren't having it. I started parking my truck in my garage at night to avoid the fines. This meant I had to shuffle things around in my workshop area, but whatever. I was trying to be a good neighbor and follow their increasingly ridiculous rules. That's when they hit me with the big one. I came home one day to find a violation notice on my door. This one was different from the others. It was longer, more detailed, and came with a much bigger fine. The notice stated that my garage was being used primarily for purposes other than the parking of passenger vehicles, and that this violated HOA rules. They cited a section of the rules that said garages should be utilized primarily for the parking of passenger vehicles and not for storage or other purposes that would prevent such use. I read that rule section probably 20 times. I'd never paid much attention to it before because I had been parking my truck in the garage, on one side. The other side was my workshop. The rule said primarily, which to me meant mainly or mostly. Since I could park a vehicle in my garage and did, I figured I was in compliance. Apparently, the board disagreed. The fine was $200, with an additional $50 per day until the violation was corrected. The notice demanded that I remove all non-vehicle-related items from the garage to restore it to its intended purpose within 14 days. I was furious. This wasn't some minor cosmetic issue like my mailbox color. They were demanding that I dismantle my entire workshop, thousands of dollars worth of tools and equipment that I used for my livelihood, because of their interpretation of a vague rule. I did what I should have done from the beginning. I hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Margaret, and she was in her 60s with decades of experience dealing with overzealous HOA boards. She reviewed my case, looked at the HOA rules and bylaws, and gave me her assessment. "You're in a tough spot," she told me. "The rule is vague enough that they can argue their interpretation is valid. However, the rule says primarily, not exclusively. If you can demonstrate that your garage is still being used primarily for parking, you might have an argument." She also pointed out something interesting. The rules didn't define what constituted primarily. Did it mean more than 50% of the space, more than 50% of the time, the primary purpose in terms of value or importance? "But here's the thing," Margaret continued. "Fighting this through the HOA's internal process and then potentially through the courts is going to be expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, you're looking at months of stress and legal fees that might exceed the fines themselves." I asked her what my options were. "Well," she said with a slight smile, "you could comply with their rule exactly as written. Not as they intended it, but as they actually wrote it." That's when I got the idea. The rule said the garage should be utilized primarily for parking passenger vehicles. It didn't say how big the vehicle had to be. It didn't say the vehicle had to be my primary car. It just said passenger vehicles, plural or singular. I went out and found the smallest street-legal car I could find for cheap. A 15-year-old subcompact that someone was selling for $800 because it needed transmission work. It ran well enough to drive into the garage under its own power, and it was registered and insured, making it technically a passenger vehicle under their rule. Cost me less than I'd already paid in their ridiculous fines. I spent a weekend reorganizing my workshop. I moved my workbench and some of my larger equipment to create a space just big enough for the tiny car. It was cramped and it made my workshop less functional, but it technically met the requirement. The garage was now being used to park a passenger vehicle. The fact that my tools and workshop equipment were also in there didn't change that fact. I took extensive photos of the setup from multiple angles, clearly showing the car parked in the garage alongside my workshop equipment. I measured the space and documented that the vehicle occupied its designated parking area. Then I drafted a detailed letter to the HOA. In the letter, I explained exactly how I had complied with their rule. I pointed out that the rule required the garage to be utilized primarily for the parking of passenger vehicles, and that my garage was now doing exactly that. It contained a registered, insured, street-legal passenger vehicle parked in a designated space. I noted that the rule did not prohibit other uses of the garage space in addition to vehicle parking, only that vehicle parking should be the primary use. Since the primary purpose of my garage was now to house this vehicle and my workshop equipment was secondary to that purpose, I was in full compliance. I made sure to be very detailed in my letter, describing exactly how I had complied with their rule word for word, and I demanded a formal response within 48 hours, as well as immediate removal of all fines from my account. I sent the letter via certified mail and also emailed it with my photos attached. The response came faster than I expected. The board president called me the next day, absolutely furious. They insisted that my setup didn't meet the spirit of the rule and that the vehicle I was using was clearly just there to get around the requirement. I could hear the anger in their voice as they told me this wasn't what the rule meant, and that I was being deliberately difficult. I stayed calm and polite. I told them I had complied with the exact wording of their rule as written, and that if they had a problem with how I'd interpreted it, perhaps they should have written a clearer rule in the first place. I pointed out that spirit of the rule wasn't legally enforceable. Only the actual written words mattered. That's when they said something that, in hindsight, was incredibly stupid on their part. They told me they were going to come inspect my garage to verify whether I was actually in compliance, and that they didn't need my permission because they had the garage code for emergency access. I reminded them that this wasn't an emergency situation, and that using the code for a routine compliance inspection without giving me proper notice would be a legal entry. I specifically cited our state law that requires HOAs to provide at least 48 hours written notice before entering a homeowner's property for non-emergency inspections. They argued with me, saying that the emergency access codes meant they could enter whenever they deemed it necessary. I told them that was absolutely not true, and that if they used my garage code to enter my property without proper notice and without my permission, I would treat it as criminal trespass and call the police. The board president got even angrier, told me I was being unreasonable and combative, and said they'd deal with this appropriately. Then they hung up on me. I immediately called Margaret and told her about the conversation. She advised me to document everything and to install a security camera in my garage if I didn't already have one. I didn't, so I went out that afternoon and bought a good quality camera system with motion detection and cloud storage. I installed cameras covering both the interior of my garage and the exterior garage doors. If they were going to try something stupid, I wanted evidence. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my garage door open. Not just the workshop side, both sides. And there were people inside my garage. I pulled into my driveway and got out of my truck, completely shocked at what I was seeing. It was the board president and the property manager, along with someone I didn't recognize, who was taking photos of the inside of my garage with what looked like a decent camera. I found out later this person was the board president's brother-in-law who did real estate photography. They'd apparently brought him along to document violations in detail. "What the hell are you doing in my garage?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite how angry I was. The board president turned to me with this smug expression. "We're conducting a compliance inspection. As I told you on the phone, we have the right to verify that homeowners are following HOA rules. I specifically told you that you needed to give me 48 hours written notice and get my permission," I said. "You can't just use my garage code to break into my property." "We didn't break in," the property manager said. "We used the access code that you voluntarily provided to the HOA for emergency purposes." "This isn't an emergency," I said. "This is an illegal entry. I'm calling the police." That got their attention. The board president started arguing that they had every right to be there, that the HOA rules gave them inspection authority, and that I was being dramatic. I ignored them, took out my phone, and called cops. I told the dispatcher that I had come home to find people inside my garage who had entered without my permission using a code I had provided for emergency purposes only. I explained that these were HOA board members conducting an unauthorized inspection, and that I wanted them removed from my property and charged with trespassing. The three of them quickly left my garage while I was still on the phone with dispatch. They stood in my driveway, the board president still arguing that they had done nothing wrong. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher and kept my phone's camera recording the whole interaction. 2 police officers arrived within about 10 minutes. I explained the situation to them, that I had provided my garage door code to the HOA for emergency access only, that I had specifically told the board president 2 days earlier that they could not use it for a routine inspection without proper notice, and that they had used it anyway to enter my garage without permission while I wasn't home. The board president tried to argue their case to the officers, showing them the HOA rules and claiming they had the authority to inspect for compliance. The officers weren't buying it. One of them explained that regardless of what the HOA rules said, entering someone's property without permission was trespassing, and using an access code that had been provided for emergency purposes to conduct a non-emergency inspection was potentially burglary. That word burglary seemed to hit the board president like a brick. Their whole demeanor changed. They started backtracking, saying they had just been trying to verify compliance and hadn't meant any harm. The officers took everyone's information and told me I could file a formal complaint if I wanted to pursue charges. They also told the board president and property manager that they were not to enter my property again without my explicit permission or a court order. After the officers and the HOA people left, I went back into my garage to assess the situation. Nothing appeared to be damaged or stolen, but they had clearly been going through everything. Tools had been moved, cabinet doors were open, and they'd obviously been documenting every detail of my workshop setup. But here's the thing. My security cameras had caught everything. I had clear video footage of them entering my garage using the keypad code, walking around inside, taking photos, and going through my belongings. The timestamp showed they had been in there for almost 20 minutes before I arrived home. I called Margaret immediately and told her what had happened. She was stunned. "They actually did it," she said. "They actually broke into your garage after you explicitly warned them it would be illegal. Please tell me you have evidence." I did. I sent her all the security camera footage along with the recording I'd made of the interaction with them and the police officers. "This is good," Margaret said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "This is really good. They just handed you a massive lawsuit on a silver platter, and potentially criminal charges too." The next day I went to the police station and filed a formal complaint. I brought copies of all my documentation, the security camera footage, the recording of my phone conversation with the board president where I had explicitly told them not to enter without notice, the emails and letters showing the progression of the dispute, and the photographs showing my garage setup that proved I was in compliance with their rule. I honestly didn't expect the police to take it seriously. I know they usually consider HOA stuff to be civil matters. But the officer who took my initial report escalated it to a detective because of the clear evidence of unauthorized entry and the fact that they'd used access codes I'd provided for emergencies to conduct a routine inspection. The detective told me later that what clinched it was when the board president, during their interview, admitted they'd used my garage code without my permission and explicitly said they didn't need permission to enter. That admission made it a slam dunk case. The detective assigned to the case reviewed all my evidence thoroughly. They interviewed me, then they interviewed the board president and the property manager. In my state, burglary is defined as entering a building or structure without permission with the intent to commit a crime inside. The detective explained that they had entered my garage without permission with the intent to document violations they could use to fine me and put a lien on my property, which constituted an intent to commit civil theft through fraudulent fines. That elevated the trespass to burglary. The detective presented the case to the prosecutor's office. After reviewing everything, the prosecutor decided to charge the board president and the property manager with felony burglary in the second degree. In our state, burglary becomes a felony when it involves entering an attached structure, like a garage, that's part of someone's residence. The photographer wasn't charged since he apparently didn't know the entry was unauthorized. He thought he'd been hired for a legitimate inspection. While the criminal case was moving forward, Margaret filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, the board president personally, and the property manager personally. The lawsuit alleged harassment, illegal entry, violation of my property rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a few other things I don't fully remember. We were seeking damages for all the fines they'd imposed, my legal fees, the cost of the security camera system, compensation for my time and stress, and punitive damages. The lawsuit also included a request for discovery. We wanted to see all the HOA's records related to enforcement actions, emails between board members, and any other documentation that might show a pattern of harassment or selective enforcement. That discovery process turned out to be incredibly valuable. It revealed that the board had been systematically targeting certain homeowners, including me, while ignoring identical or worse violations by homeowners who were friends with board members. There were emails between board members discussing how to get rid of homeowners they didn't like by making life difficult for them through fines and violations. One email chain was particularly damning. It showed the board president and property manager discussing my garage situation, with the board president writing, "The carpenter is trying to be clever with his little car. We need to get in there and document that his workshop is still the dominant use of the space. Use the emergency code if we have to. He can't stop us from inspecting." This was written the day before they broke into my garage. The discovery also showed that they had been collecting garage door codes not for emergency access, as they'd claimed, but specifically to give themselves the ability to conduct surprise inspections. There were multiple instances of them entering other homeowners' garages without permission, though apparently I was the only one who had explicitly warned them not to do it and then caught them on camera. The criminal cases moved forward. I had to testify at the preliminary hearing, where the defense attorneys tried to argue that their clients had reasonably believed they had the authority to enter my garage based on their interpretation of the HOA rules. The judge didn't buy it, especially after the prosecutor played the recording of my phone conversation where I had explicitly told them it would be illegal. The defense tried to get the charges reduced or dismissed, but the evidence was too strong. The video footage, the documentation of my warning, the email discussing using the emergency code to get into my garage despite my objections, it all painted a clear picture of intentional illegal entry. Meanwhile, the civil case was progressing. The HOA's insurance company got involved and their lawyers started pushing for settlement. They knew the discovery had revealed serious misconduct and that going to trial would likely result in a substantial judgment against their client. The whole situation started getting media attention too. A local news station did a story on HOA overreach and my case was featured prominently. The story showed my garage setup demonstrating how I had technically complied with the rule, played clips from my security footage showing the board members entering my garage, and interviewed other homeowners in the neighborhood who had similar stories of harassment by the board. The media coverage was actually really helpful. It put public pressure on the HOA and the board members, and it made their lawyers even more eager to settle the civil case quickly before the criminal trials started and generated more negative publicity. Eventually, both cases settled. The board president and property manager were facing felony burglary charges that could mean actual prison time. Their lawyers pushed hard for a plea deal. In exchange for guilty pleas to reduce misdemeanor trespass charges, they agreed to resign from the board immediately, pay substantial fines, complete 200 hours of community service each, and sign agreements that they would never serve on any HOA board for 10 years. The prosecutor agreed because I supported the deal. I wanted them gone and held accountable, not to ruin their entire lives with felony convictions. On the civil side, the HOA's insurance company settled for a significant amount. All the fines and violations on my account were permanently removed. They paid all my legal fees, they paid for my security camera system, they compensated me for my time dealing with all of this. And they paid me a substantial cash settlement on top of that. I can't disclose the exact amount due to the settlement agreement, but let's just say it was enough that I could afford to completely upgrade my workshop equipment. As part of the settlement, the HOA also had to revise their rules to be much clearer about garage use, specifically allowing for workshop and hobby use as long as vehicles could still be parked. They also had to destroy all the garage door codes they had collected and implement a new policy requiring 48 hours written notice and homeowner consent for any non-emergency property inspections. The whole ordeal took almost 2 years from start to finish. Even with the settlement covering my legal fees, it still cost me time, stress, and more sleepless nights than I care to admit. But looking back, I am glad I stood my ground. The old board is gone. The new board is much more reasonable and mostly focuses on actual community maintenance instead of micromanaging everyone's garage. Several neighbors have thanked me since then, saying the old board had made their lives miserable too, but they never knew how to push back. I still have my workshop. I still park my truck in the garage, and yes, I still have that tiny little car sitting there too, registered and insured, just as a reminder. It has become a conversation piece when people visit. Why do you have that thing, they ask. And then I get to tell them about the time my HOA tried to force me to remove my workshop. So I bought the smallest street-legal car I could find, and complied with their rule exactly as written. The board president and property manager both moved out of the neighborhood within 6 months of their convictions. The property manager also lost their job with the management company, which was not surprising. Companies do not love employing people who use emergency access codes to enter homeowners' garages without permission. The HOA had to remove every fine from my account, pay my legal fees, cover the camera system, and rewrite the garage rules so workshop and hobby use are clearly allowed as long as a vehicle can still be parked inside. They also had to destroy the garage codes they had collected and create a new policy requiring written notice and homeowner consent for any non-emergency inspection. That part matters most to me. They did not just lose against me. They lost the system they had been using to intimidate people. The funniest part is that none of this would have happened if they had accepted my compliance. I parked a registered, insured passenger vehicle in the garage, exactly like the rule required. The workshop was still there, but the rule never said the garage had to be used exclusively for parking. They did not like that I followed the wording instead of the version they wished they had written. So they broke into my garage to prove I was violating their rule. Instead, they proved they were violating the law. I still would not recommend buying into an HOA if you can avoid it, but if you already live in one, my advice is simple. Know the rules, keep records, and document everything. And maybe keep a cheap little car handy just in case you ever need to explain the difference between the letter of the rule and the spirit of the rule. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in corporate at a massive company. Overall, it is a great place, but unfortunately, I was stuck under a micromanaging director who had random neurotic episodes. Our team was always burned out because if Mr. Director saw you leave your desk for any reason, whether it was to go to the bathroom, get water, or take a lunch break, he took that as a sign that you were not busy enough. Then he would pile on even more useless work. If you left even a minute before 5:05, he got upset. And forget about working from home even though everyone else in the company seemed to be doing it. Eventually, the time came for a big international trip I had been planning for years. It was finally possible after COVID. I hardly ever took time off and had spent the whole year working non-stop while my friends on other teams actually enjoyed their lives. Our team had been pressured more than ever to always be working and to avoid taking time off. We had so much work that taking vacation felt almost impossible. Before leaving, I made sure everything was wrapped up. It was also December, so most people were out anyway. I took my 1.5-week trip and had an amazing time. Fast forward about a month, and my manager, who reported to Mr. Director, told me that I needed to be careful and not take so much vacation. He stated very matter-of-factly that I needed to watch how I used my days because I had apparently run out of time off. I was shocked. We were checking vacation days now? We had been repeatedly told that we should not log our days in the system because they were not tracking them. It was supposedly an honor system. Nobody cared how many days you took as long as it was reasonable. I asked what I should do differently. I told him that I always checked well in advance and added the time off to his calendar. I asked if I should start logging my days in the system. I also asked how it was possible that I had run out of time when I knew I had at least a week left, because I tracked it myself. He would not give me a straight answer and stayed extremely vague. Fine. Since we were now tracking vacation days, I decided I would make sure everything was properly logged in the system. I went in and backlogged every day I had ever taken off in prior years. Weeks upon weeks of paid time off. Some of the dates were so old that they needed human resources approval. My manager had to go in and approve every single request because the system notified him and required a response. Going forward, I submitted everything, and yes, I still had plenty of paid time off left. My manager started getting annoyed. He told me I really did not need to log time off. I stopped him right there and said, "But I thought I was taking too much vacation. We all need to make sure we are being truthful about the honor system." He did not know what to say. Later, a teammate told me what had actually happened. It turned out that one day, Mr. Director randomly decided his team was taking too much time off. He was upset that all the useless work he assigned was not getting done. So he had one of his tantrums and started freaking out. He tracked down every day off, doctor's appointment, sick day, and absence that our team of 8 people had taken going back at least a year. He checked calendars, dug through emails, and asked other people whether they had seen us on certain days. This was the same man who had told us over and over again, "You do not need to log your days, we are not checking." But because Mr. Director thought he was far too busy and important to bring his concerns directly to us lowly employees, or to talk things through like an adult and get the facts first, he decided to secretly account for every hour I was not at work. This became one of many infractions that appeared out of nowhere. Mr. Director was also an extremely difficult person to work with. Other teams did not want to work with our team because of him. He treated people poorly, and I cannot even count how many people flat out hated him. And guess what? Nobody on our team had used anywhere near all their paid time off. There were no performance concerns either. In fact, we were an extremely high-performing team because everyone was constantly afraid of setting him off. I always asked for feedback, and I never got anything useful. Meanwhile, co-workers with planned family trips were being pressured to push them back again and again because Mr. Director needed them sitting at their desks just in case something important came up. At the same time, Mr. Director made sure to use more than his allotted paid time off and frequently took week-long trips himself. Since my paid time off was now being tracked, I made sure to use the rest of it. Mr. Director actually tried to stop me, but I threatened to take it up with human resources because I had plenty of time left. He backed off. Thankfully, I eventually escaped that team and moved internally. I had been doing so much work, much of it technical work, for a non-technical team that nobody else knew how to do it. After I moved, Mr. Director started frantically reaching out to me and demanding that I fix things, even though I had spent my last 2 weeks documenting everything and transitioning it all over. I chose to ignore him, and it felt great. My old teammates who are still there are miserable. The people who replaced us are already trying to leave. One guy who had been with the company for years left the company completely 1 month after joining that team, once he realized what a mistake he had made. The next one is an entitled people story. I first met James and Rose, fake names obviously, when I heard my doorbell ring. I went downstairs and found them already standing in my living room. Yes, really, my girlfriend had opened the door and they had just walked straight in like they owned the place. I awkwardly said hello while guiding them back out through the front door. I thought that would be the end of it. I was very wrong. James and Rose had bought an ex-council house that had been badly damaged by the previous tenants. I am talking busted walls, shattered windows, and all sorts of other problems. The house had been listed accurately, so none of this should have been a surprise to them. Strangely enough, I had never had any issues with the people who used to rent the place, so I was genuinely amazed when they left and I saw the damage they had done. Apparently, James and Rose decided that I would be helping them with the renovations. They had the audacity to come over with a contract they had drafted themselves. According to this contract, their builders would be allowed to use my garden, my bathroom, and even my kitchen whenever they needed it until their own kitchen was installed. Keep in mind, them handing me this contract was only the second time I had ever interacted with them. I went over and told them the whole thing was ridiculous and that they could forget it. They were not pleased and slammed the door in my face. Not too long after that, I found them standing in my back garden. My girlfriend had been hanging up laundry, and they had apparently heard her. For some reason, they decided that meant they could let themselves through my front garden, around the side of my house, and right up to her. My girlfriend was practically frozen, still holding a pair of her pants, while these two just stood there looking around and smiling. Then they suggested that, since I had been so unhelpful with their renovations, I should host a barbecue for them and their friends. What friends, you ask? No idea. I shut that down quickly and told them never to come into my back garden again. But they were not finished. Right after being told to leave, they had the nerve to suggest that I give up roughly 1/5 of my garden so our gardens could be equally sized. I told them very clearly that they could forget it. It was not my problem that they had bought a house with a smaller garden. I was absolutely furious, and I think they realized they had pushed things too far because they quickly left. Apparently, James and Rose then decided that if I would not willingly give them part of my garden, they would try to take it instead. One day, from my back room, I saw some man standing at the end of my garden. I went outside to ask who he was and how he had gotten there. Then in walked, of course, James and Rose. It turned out they had torn down our adjoining fence. The man was there to plan where the new fence would go. Clearly, he had not been told that this was my garden and that I had absolutely not agreed to any of this, and it did not stop there. They had also been peeking through my windows and had questions about my belongings. I do kickboxing and have a bob, which is a life-size training dummy. They told me that it was scary and should probably be moved away from the window because they did not want to see it while enjoying their newly enlarged garden. I calmly told the man that I was keeping all of my garden and that none of them had permission to be there. I also told James and Rose that if I caught them in my garden again, they were volunteering to become my new Bob. The last I heard, they had tried to bully our 70-year-old neighbor into giving up part of his garden, too. He has early-onset dementia, and 4 of his 5 sons visit regularly, though they do not live with him. I stay in contact with them because I go around now and then to help my neighbor, or just chat with him and keep him company. He is a really cool guy. When I heard him upset about some contract and about losing the area where his shed was, I had to fight not to see red. One text to his sons, and that nonsense was shut down very quickly. I never thought I would meet people this entitled, but here we are. Needless to say, James and Rose have kept their distance since my very explicit warnings, which also extend to bothering our dear old neighbor. My girlfriend is back to hanging the washing outside, but she will not open the front door without checking the Ring camera first now, just in case it is them. Has anyone else dealt with neighbors from hell like this? Anyway, thank you for watching.